All right, good morning, television neighbors. Just wanted to start today. Someone asked me a question. They wanted me to share my thoughts on people's driving habits relative to their place in life. And I wasn't exactly sure what the question was in one sense, because I wasn't sure if they were talking about socioeconomic place in life or their age. And so I figured I've been thinking about this for a long time, and so I have some thoughts that maybe other people haven't come to, but I can talk a little bit about my personal experience with regard to age and driving, and then I will go on and switch to the socioeconomic possibilities, socioeconomic possibilities. And the good thing about the socioeconomic situations is that a lot of people, they kind of start at a lower socioeconomic level, and then as they gain experience, then as they gain experience, then they start to change and gain access to higher tiers, and I think that there both of these factors, age and socioeconomic status, can have an effect on driving. And then I suppose if I have time, it might be worthwhile to talk about old age. And one interesting thing about old age is I've seen a lot of articles on the acceptance of self-driving vehicles, and I think it's interesting that there's been a lot of resistance, and apparently a lot of that resistance is from older people who tend to be less comfortable with technology, and they don't really want anyone to be driving. I'll just turn off that school speed limit for me. So the interesting thing is that the state has been, and by that I am referring to the United States government, and it's probably happening elsewhere. When it comes to old people driving, since the older people are less likely to embrace self-driving cars, but old people also tend to have at least well-publicized accidents, and eventually they lose their authorization from the state to drive. It's interesting to me that they're kind of promoting it as a way for seniors to be liberated from relying on rides from relatives and relying on rides from various services. Some of them are charity, some of them can be kind of expensive. So anyway, I'd like to have time to circle back to that, but that's an interesting topic to discuss. But anyway, so the way I drove at various points in my life, right now I'm 41, so I guess some would say I drive like a middle-aged a-hole, but I try not to do that. I think the way that I drive is intentionally more courteous than what I typically encounter, and there's a focus on predictability, and that isn't necessarily the same as what it was when I was younger, when, quite frankly, I was experimenting with driving and how to drive and what processes worked well. I had the advice of my parents, who were relatively safe drivers. I think one thing that I may have picked up from my father, but I don't know, it could just be a natural young punk thing, is I tended to have a sense of a sense of justice, that I could get offended easily, like if someone violated my space, my lawful use of the roadway, and I do see that a lot. You see people get mad because they get cut off in traffic and stuff like that. And the thing there is that they get just as mad if it's intentional as if it's accidental, and it's very difficult sometimes to tell if it's accidental or intentional at the very beginning. Also, there are some people who are just reckless as a matter of principle, and that's their driving strategy overall, is to essentially intimidate others by being so reckless that these are the people that you see you'll be driving down the road, and ahead of you on the freeway you'll see like the side of a car going across all the lanes of traffic in a way that I don't think I could appropriately check to see if anyone was going to hit me. So it's interesting to see that as a strategy. And also people who, it's hard to tell if they're the people that bug me, that they get off at a freeway ramp and then pass everyone in gridlock traffic and then get back on. That would be another example. I see that fairly often. There's a thing called a colloquially called a suicide lane. It's a center left turn only lane, and you're only allowed to turn, you're allowed to get into it to turn left out of the roadway, but you're really otherwise supposed to stay out of it. And I've seen people pass, groups of cars in those lanes, even passing them while going through intersections, which is definitely a no-no under Ohio statute. So, but yeah, I just was kind of experimental. I kind of goofed around a bit. I sped a little bit, and it was not ever enough speeding to actually result in any long-term gains as far as my position in traffic. But I think it's pretty common to see people speed at about that amount. They just feel like they're getting there a little bit faster and stuff like that. Now, my speeding came to an end. In my case, I got a ticket, and I felt really, I felt like it wasn't worth it. So I just modified my behavior off of that, and I just stopped speeding as a matter of, I just didn't want to give law enforcement any excuses to pull me over anymore. It also coincided with kind of a wider view of the nature of the state in general, and what their motivations are in having things like speeding laws. If the purpose of a speeding law was to actually prevent people from speeding, there are ways that it could be enforced much more vigorously. And as a result of its lax enforcement, lots of people speed all the time, and they've told me, well, I just, it's the speeding tickets I pay and the points on my license and stuff, those are all just, I work those into the costs of owning a car, and I don't really see it that way. I fundamentally see things like speeding infractions and most of these things as excuses for the state to go and nose into your business, maybe get a canine to sniff around your car and have them alert. I think that function could be done just as well with a sock puppet on the officer's hand. They could have their sock, they could roll their sock off their foot and then have their sock puppet friend sniff around your car, and if the cop's sock puppet thinks that you have drugs, then the sock puppet will alert, and then that should be cause for a search. Because and also, why limit it just to dogs? We could have other animals like a drug sniffing snake or a squirrel or whatever. It's kind of like a ventriloquist dummy, really. So it doesn't really matter what they use. Even their imaginary friend. That would be probably more honest. So yeah, I just started following the speed limit because I didn't want anyone to have an excuse to inquire as to what I was doing. So, see, there was a driver that was a little, they cut over, they wanted over, there was a lot of opportunity there with plenty of room, but I don't know, I think they just did a little aggressively than normal. Now, this area we're probably going to be encountering just a few more, like, less experienced, more aggressive drivers, just because we're heading toward the university campus, and I know that this is one of my old stomping grounds for driving my way to school in the mornings when I was going to the university here. And then there were a lot of people who bragged about coming through this in gridlock, doing like 60 or 70 and like driving on the berm or various things like that. So I don't see it very much, but doesn't mean they didn't try it. So but yeah, so essentially, as I aged, I guess I mellowed a little bit. I got some experience. I kind of just decided that a lot of the aggressive or fast driving things I did weren't worth it, and I settled into more of a pattern of just being predictable. But then probably around the time when I was studying engineering, kind of near the end of that, I started thinking about getting through traffic as an engineering problem. And like here you can see I'm driving, I've got a considerable 2 under or right at the speed limit at most. And so what that does is if there's someone who has the cruise set at a couple over, then they approach me and they see that I'm going slower, or they tailgate me and they see that I don't speed up because the cruise control doesn't know that they're tailgating me. And so I think it just serves to make me predictable, but also to send a message that, like, on a road like this, I'm not in the left lane. They can go around. Sometimes people go around in the right lane, which is primarily for merging. And if that right lane were not so busy, ordinarily, like if it were like 3 a.m. and I were coming down here, I'd be off in that right lane, unless a vehicle started to merge on, and then I'd make room for them. But that's generally, I think age-wise, younger drivers tend to be a little bit more experimental. Sometimes that manifests itself as recklessness, and oftentimes, they speed. I never drank and drive or got inebriated. Just generally, I don't drink very much. I've been at some parties where I drank a whole bunch, but those were parties where it was more of an experiment. Like other people were like, I wonder what you're like drunk, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna stay here overnight and the beer is free, so you're funding this experiment, and I don't get drunk all the time, so let's just see what happens. And I wasn't all that impressed myself. Nothing particularly amusing happened, but apparently I am a happy drunk and I'm lots of fun, apparently. But I don't know. Most of the time, though, I don't drink anything, so I'm designated driver material. And then a lot of times I'm carrying a firearm, which you're not allowed to drink anything if you're carrying a firearm in Ohio. So it kind of, I prefer carrying a firearm to getting drunk, so I tend to be sober when I'm driving for a variety of factors. So yeah, I mean, that seems to be what I see with a lot of other people. They seem to be younger people. Sometimes they're just really diligent drivers, but other times, especially with other kids in the car, or other young people in the car, they can be tempted. I really seem to notice it when I hop in the car with coworkers, and there are just a lot of coworkers. These are mostly software developers, engineers, technical people. They don't seem to have put 2 and 2 together the way I have in an engineering sense about driving. They tend to just do habitual stuff, like they tailgate people. They're pretty reckless. They signal. They turn without signaling, stuff like that. It's kind of irritating. I generally avoid riding around with coworkers, and also it's not clear whether or not coworkers are properly insured. Most people are underinsured for like more than one other passenger, and so when you go to lunch with someone, if they get in an accident and get everyone hurt, you could be placed in the situation where your insurance company is suing them for every penny they have for the rest of their life if there are serious injuries or a lengthy hospital stay resulting from their actions. So it's just a situation I generally avoid, but I make exceptions sometimes. Another thing that I avoid by doing that is sitting down in someone's car full of dog hair, so that's nice. Yeah, so the other angle of it is a socioeconomic thing, and that's one thing. I do drive a significant distance across the city each day, so I tend to cross through quite a few neighborhoods. Especially in the evenings, I tend to go through a neighborhood that is a little more economically depressed. And one thing I've noticed is that there seems to be kind of a no quarter attitude. The cars seem to be a little more beat up in general, and they also people are less likely to give you, to let you in. In fact, a lot of times when there is a spot to be let in, it seems like they kind of speed up and close the gap. So I think that's interesting. Also, when it comes to less affordable drivers who can afford a nicer vehicle less, I guess, I noticed that a lot of utility trucks, for the trades people, if they have, they can be kind of aggressive drivers if they have their company name painted all over the side, but those guys tend to be a little more tame. Every once in a while I'll see someone who's hurrying somewhere, and it's nice if they have the company name all over it, because then you can just call them up and say, hey, or send them an email and say, hey, I saw this vehicle doing this, and you should talk to them about it, because they're giving your company a bad name. And sometimes it's like a sole proprietor, and they defend their actions to you in the there's a no vehicle coming up trying to shut me down, but I want to get off here, so he's tailgating and speeding, and he crossed the double white line, which is the same as a double yellow line. I normally don't cross that, but I did just a tiny bit there at the end, because and he didn't even want off at the exit I want off at. He was just passing everyone on the right and tailgating. It's an OSU bus. I'll have to ask my buddy who was driving that, because he's one of the top guys at OSU's transit thing. It's always interesting when I ask him about bad drivers. It just goes to say, goes to show, I was just talking about unsafe driving, aggressive driving with your company logo plastered all over the vehicle. I wouldn't want to do it. But a lot of the people I see, they do it with vehicles where it's not readily visible. It's like an unmarked van or an unmarked pickup truck, or something like that. And it's just got a school bus coming. Gotta watch out. Stop on red. It's not blinking yet. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, my theory on it is, one is that the vehicles are not very expensive, but you'd think they wouldn't want to drive recklessly because of health reasons. I mean, I think most people don't want to get in a bad accident and get injured. So I think some of it might actually be role models in their community just don't drive very well, or don't place a high value on automotive safety. Well, here we've got a police officer directing traffic. He put his hand up right after I passed, because there's a COTA bus like a quarter mile down the road. That guy takes Spock's quote from Star Trek II to heart. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, huh? Stop all the traffic, then let the COTA bus lumber along for a half mile. It's probably carrying 3 revenue generating passengers in that direction this time of day, so excellent decision. But yeah, so I suspect that there are some, it'd be really interesting to study. There seem to be a lot of advertising for like state minimum coverage insurance because that's a mandate in Ohio. But it's minimum coverage. I mean, it pretty much only covers like the other person. It doesn't, if you mash up your car or something. Now, a lot of these cars, they can't be worth more than like $100 or $200 the way I figure it. So they're kind of throwaway vehicles. So I guess if you're driving a throwaway vehicle, I mean, most of these wrecks are, they're going to total a vehicle like that, and they're not very hard to replace. Most of the accidents, I'd imagine, are just fender benders and stuff like that. So, but there could be some injuries associated. So yeah, it'd be really interesting for further study. One thing that I think is a downside of it is that because a lot of drivers with, I'm guessing their socioeconomic status based on the quality of their car, and sometimes based on their appearance. If I see them like get out of the car at the grocery store or whatever, it's interesting though, because like I don't know. I think that I think that one of the things that police did when they officially switched away from racial profiling is that they switched to economic profiling, and I think that is every bit as effective for what they're trying to do, which is nose into people's business, find out if they're making any kind of mistakes or make any misstatements, and then get an excuse to search their vehicle. So let's see if they can find something to arrest them for, see if they have any warrants, that kind of stuff. So fishing expeditions for the most part. But yeah, I wish there were some good data I could see on like the type of like the blue book value of the average vehicle that the police stop. Because I would imagine that the average vehicle that the police interact with, the blue book value is kind of low. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of a weird topic because I wasn't exactly sure what was being asked, but those are some of my initial thoughts on it. Maybe I'll get some clarification on it. Yeah, and I did want to touch base on the older drivers. I think a lot of the really old drivers seem to be extremely cautious, which I think is a good thing. And it frustrates other drivers on the road. And I think the older I get, the more cautious I get. But like my parents, they recently got a vehicle that has like intelligent cruise control. It lets you like it does a little, it coasts, it brakes, it essentially maintains a kind of a general fixed safe distance between the cars ahead of you. And so if the cars, so you can have it on in like gridlock traffic, I guess, and it'll just kind of keep going for you, and you just have to pretty much steer. But and you can set that to different levels of aggressiveness, I think, which is kind of interesting that you have different algorithms to choose from. But yeah, my mom was commenting she thought it was a little bit too aggressive. It just started up way too fast for her tastes. And so she was probably going to adjust it to a lower rate. So it's interesting that even when older people have automation helping them drive, they tend to favor a more cautious and conservative approach. So when we do have self-driving cars, even though everyone could drive identically, they could all be driving with the same general rule set, I think it's going to be an interesting problem for them to solve when it comes to self-driving cars, because some people will be choosing aggressive algorithms, like maybe a Tesla driver might select just pushing the limits mode or something like that, where the car is going to drive as aggressively and as performant as it can within the law. And that's going to be an exciting ride. You'll be able to tell those people because their hair will be all standing up at the end of the ride. It'll be like a roller coaster or something. But then you might have people who just they get in some like self-driving minibus or something, and it just kind of pokes along like a transit bus or something. So I think at least in the early phases, there's probably going to be a mix of that until people get a little bit more confident of the self-driving car capabilities. And I think the sweet spot is you'll have, much like jetliner pilots don't fly to the limit of the envelope for the airplane for passenger comfort. They, I think you're going to end up sometimes you're going to end up with a car that is going to drive as performantly as it can without causing the passenger discomfort. So you're going to be able to set like some guidelines, like how many G's you're willing to tolerate as a passenger, probably like 1 G at most. And then the car is just going to go through everything and try to, cradle you inside. They should probably also have a baby mode. So if you've got a little baby in the car, it'll be extra cautious or something like that. So anyway, I hope that answered the original poster's questions. I've been getting a lot of interesting, thought-provoking questions from that person, so I appreciate it. And I guess if anyone wants to send in a question for the vlog, I have a couple that I'd like to talk about going forward, but on my list. But I'm always looking to fill that list with interesting subjects so that I can prioritize those. So I would just say send it to vlog@marknoble.com. That's MARKNOBLE. That's November Oscar Bravo Lima Echo. And I will see you all guys tomorrow. See you guys all tomorrow. There we go. That's a much better way to end it. Bye.